I'm very happy to be here with you. And this conference, ICD-MD Nordic, is a very good situation to have discussion on this topic, which is very hot in Europe right now. Just in the beginning, I tell you a little bit about euthanasia, and then I go to those questions which are right now under discussion in Finland. Sorry, this doesn't run. Okay, so euthanasia is not so rare. It's quite not so common. It's quite rare, actually, in the world. For example, in Asia, there are no euthanasia and no physician-assisted suicide. There are many aspects in this question, and each one has their own fields to discuss. What are the fields where you make those discussions which are important for you? I think that's one good question. And those basic arguments which we meet are these. Should one have the right to decide himself the time to die? Is there intolerable suffering which cannot be essentially relieved? And they say that the palliative care right now is not good enough. Is that true? Well, there are some difficult cases, but what are the main reasons for euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide? That's a hot topic, hot question. And when you discuss about these things, usually you see the discussion in the press or at radio, TV, at your professional journals. But important discussions are made in the parliament because they make the laws, and in the ministry groups which make preparations for the laws. And we have to discuss with the lawyers, philosophers, and in the internet, of course, the discussion is very wide. So the Christian approach to this thing, we may look just 3 places in the Bible. For the first, at the Genesis, at the creation chapter, it said that God created man in his own image. So life is a gift, and we are very special because we are images of God. That's the value to our life. And the second aspect is the fall of man, where it said that the man wanted to be like God, knowing good and evil. Does this happen also in the case when we discuss about euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide? Do we want this, what the serpent suggested for the man? The third aspect is the suffering itself. We all know Job. He was a man who suffered a lot. I think he fulfilled all the criteria for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, what you can ever image. But in this suffering, he left his life to the hands of God. He didn't try to make decisions of his own concerning his life. So the moment before the death, the end of life, it's very existential moment. There are many thoughts related to death and suffering, and also spiritual struggle. And this process is very relevant to the patients for the preparation for the death. So although there is suffering, maybe because of the suffering, the person may experience something very essential about his life, and probably also something about God, like job made. And sometimes, and many often, the desire for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide may stem from the fear for death. And if there are those things, so they cut something probably from the end of life, which could have been very essential stage of the life. And who knows what God has to say for man during those last days. I'm aware to take this possibility away from God. So when we talk about euthanasia and physician-assisted, there's a very wide kind of terminology. And usually those who support euthanasia, they use euphemisms. So words which show the thing in a very, very positive light, and does not tell everything what's inside the word. So they try to get more acceptance for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide this way. In Finland, there's a word kuolinapu, which is very troublesome. I don't know about the Swedish word dödshjälp. I think it's more clear, meaning euthanasia and physician-assisted. But in Finland, the word kuolinapu, it may also need every kind of help in the end of life. So it's a very curious word to use, and I recommend not to use it, although if you don't explain very clearly what you mean when you say about something about that. Okay, so it's the important division, the intention. Do you allow death? That end of life care is that? You don't try to keep alive, you allow the death come? Or do you cause the death intentionally? So that's euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. So that's the main difference. And those who are for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide usually try to mix these somehow and made it and confuse it. So be aware of that. And you should know the definitions for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. So there is really an intentional killing in the euthanasia, or intentional ending of life of the patient. And the European Association for Palliative Care has made these definitions, and they are very good. So this is the same thing which I said, that the intention of the act is very essential. So like we yesterday heard in the case of consensus objection or freedom of conscience, the European legislation is very important when we discuss about this subject, euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. So the Convention on Human Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, very clearly says that no one shall be deprived of his life intentionally. So that's the main point, the main human right for everyone, and this is the most basic universal human right. Also, the other human rights should not violate this if there is a conflict. So the European Court of Human Rights has also confirmed this, that this is the supreme right. So there is no right to die, so that there's no obligation to the countries to assist in suicide or to arrange euthanasia. And there is no permission, neither prohibition to euthanasia according to this court. And now there's it's exactly one case which in the court process where this euthanasia is tested, is it legal or not? It's against Belgium. And let's see what happens. It's a very important case. So usually it's said that autonomy is the main reason to ask euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, and it's based on the idea that autonomy would be the primary human right, but it's not so. Your autonomy is limited in many ways. For example, in the traffic, you have the traffic rules which you have to follow. They limit your autonomy to drive as fast as you want. But usually in the legislation, patients are given quite many rights, and also the autonomy of the patient, it's very important right, but you can't demand certain care. You may refuse to get some care, but you can't demand. Physician is finally the one who makes a decision for the care. So, at the European level, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is the social ethic organ which makes lines for ethics, in social ethics, and it has condemned euthanasia at least in two resolutions. So these are very important when you discuss about the legislation and the laws concerning, because these are not these are so-called soft law. These are laws, not actually, but these are ethical obligations. And as we heard in the beginning, in all Nordic countries, euthanasia is prohibited. And assisted suicide is also prohibited in Norway and Denmark, but not in Finland or Sweden. But also in these countries, the constitution and other laws secure the right for living in a way that makes it possible that if you assist in a suicide as a physician, you get punished. That's happened. So in Sweden, there was one case which you heard, that the physician lost his license. In Finland, there has been no cases to test this. But for sure in Finland, I think the physician would get punished. So in medical ethics, World Medical Association is the one who makes those international ethical codes and lines for physicians, and it has made several declarations and banned euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, so they are unethical. And in Finland, so things went on so that there's a possibility for citizens' initiative, and that way the idea to have a euthanasia law went to the parliament, and the parliament discussed this carefully and sent it to a committee. The content of the initiative was quite similar that there is the legislation in Belgium or in the Netherlands. And the during this process in the parliament. They were given good new end-of-life guidelines, which told how to keep palliative care in the end of life. And also the Finnish Medical Association Council made a statement for palliative care instead of euthanasia. And some leading physicians of palliative units in University Hospital made a common statement to the parliament. And some hospices gave also to the parliament their opinions. And one of the most important things is that the National Advisory Board of Social Welfare and Healthcare and Ethics, ETENE, made a new statement on euthanasia, where it pointed out that first there should be a proper palliative care before we can discuss about the question of euthanasia. And that was very important argument in the discussion. So there were opinion surveys, but they made with the difficult word kuolinapu in Finnish. So the results were not reliable. So finally, the Social Affairs and Health Committee of the Parliament asked several expert opinions, for example, Finnish Medical Association, but also from Finnish Christian Medical Society, and that was very good. And we gave a very profound expert opinion against euthanasia. And it's good that you can see all these expert opinions at the websites of Parliament. And we made also a publication against euthanasia. This was collected from the articles which were published in our Finnish Christian Medical Society journal. And we connected it to our expert opinion. So it's also on the websites of the parliament, and that's a very clever thing, I think. And this is the expert opinion. I don't go through it. You may afterwards look at the slides. And also there's the Finnish Medical Association expert opinion, which was very good and clearly against euthanasia. You may look at this afterwards. So the main question is, which was said here already, what is life which is worthy to live? And to this question, we said that the life of a human being is so valuable that it could not be touched by the man. So also those many handicapped organizations thought that if there would be a euthanasia law, their position would be more vulnerable. And so in Finland, the Social Affairs and Health Committee of the Parliament gave an unanimous statement with two proposals. First, they suggested to reject the citizens' initiative for euthanasia legislation. And secondly, they suggested that Parliament sets our regards of the government to set up a broad-based expert group to clarify the regulatory requirements for good end-of-life care, self-determination, nursing, and euthanasia, and if necessary, provide Parliament with a proposal for legislative changes on the basis of the study. So this group is right now working on, and it has already stopped its work, and it's making its final statement. And there are a couple of members who have consulted me with this subject, and I have supported them. And it looks like that there are lawyers which are very positive for euthanasia and physicists assist suicide, and our members in the group, they are against, and there's clear division of the opinions. And we hope that also the opinion against euthanasia would be quite clear in the final document which comes out. So there are some statistics about a survey which the Finnish Medical Association has made among those doctors first who work with dying people, and they are clearly against euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, but they want the law for hospice care, for end-of-life care. And there's a newer survey, and it's quite the same that those doctors who are more skilled with taking care of dying people, they are against. But generally, half of the physicians are against, and half of the physicians are for euthanasia. Maybe it's so that and a very important thing is that there are some those who support euthanasia. If they say that 30% of them say that if there is a proper palliative care law, then there is no need for euthanasia. So 20% of those who support euthanasia in the survey say this. So actually, our aim is to have a very good palliative care and end-of-life care in Finland. So when there is such after 10 years, let's say, then there is, according to these euthanasia supporters, anymore no need for euthanasia. So in Finland, the delegate committee of the Finnish Medical Association just at September decided, no, it was December, decided to hold the position of the Finnish Medical Association against euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. And at the same time, there was under renewal the new print, the new edition of the medical ethics book, which is published by the Finnish Medical Association too. And the article there was against euthanasia, and it was at the same time in this committee, and they accepted it. And so in the new book of medical ethics by the Finnish Medical Association, there's an article which clearly makes the arguments against euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. And I have been working in this group, this ethics committee, and I have written parts of this book. And I think it's very important position for a Christian doctor to be in the National Medical Association in an ethical group and effect to the ethical politics of the medical association, because those rules, those lines, they are for all the physicians in the country, and also the courts have to take into account what is the ethical declarations of the medical association. So that's it has really weight to the common opinion and to the legislation and to the processes which are going on. So the good palliative care is our main goal now, and we shall have a good legislation. The group which I told will make a good success, and this broad-based expert group will make good suggestions for end-of-life care legislation. But as I told, the views concerning euthanasia, they spread very much. And I hope that there will be balanced document about these views. So if you want to go more through to this subject, I would recommend this book, which is made together with Nordic countries. This is in Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. And there's also one chapter from Finland. I've written that. And there are also a website for this where you can load the book freely. It's without cost for you. and also the Facebook site is for this. So thank you. My conclusion is that life is a valuable gift from God. Let's keep it so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Rick Paul, please come forward. Now the experience from Holland.
Well, I totally agree about what is said, and I've limited my presentation to, I think, 5 or 6 short slides, because I will talk about the personal experience I have in my hospital. There we are. Can I advance the slides? Or can we? Yeah. So I'll tell you about the Dutch situation. Can I have the next slide? We had a very early legislation. We were one of the front runners in the world, and we became known as such. And why did that happen? Well, in Holland, everything is open for debate. That's long in the culture. And right from the beginning, it's out in the open. It's also in the press. And I knew from colleagues in other countries that euthanasia was going on, but it was hidden. It was never reported. It was something between the doctor and the patient. In Holland, that's different. It's out in the open. And even it was against the law, they started the protocol because people felt they wanted. And that's something in Holland. We have a special relation with the law. We're totally different from Germany. In Holland, except when it is absolutely forbidden, all other things are allowed or tolerated. In Germany, except is really allowed, all other things are just not done. Totally different way you deal with the law. So the protocol started, it had to be a terminal illness and unbearable suffering. And of course, that's subjective. There need to be approval by 2 physicians. And later on, if it was done, a lot of reports had to be filled out, and it was all assessed by a national committee. And one of the committee members is a Christian and is a professor of ethics. And of course, he's heavily criticized of being member of that committee, but he says, well, as a Christian, then I know what's going on. And I can tell our point of view. He's as much against euthanasia as I am, but he said we need to be there. And consensus objection, freedom of conscience is allowed, but as a doctor, you're supposed then to refer to another doctor. And the present debate, because you know it's always continuing, the present debate is very much about unbearable psychological suffering. Is it allowed? Yes or no? A few cases have happened. It's heavily debated. And now the next debate is about incompetent to act for oneself. So people are not being able to give their consent. Is it allowed to do so? And it's very interesting to see that in the last debate, one of the forerunners in euthanasia stands up and said, this is not what we have intended. This is going way too far. And I think that's very honest. But I wonder if that will stem the tide. Next one. My personal situation, I work in a university center, and my patients, surgical patients, are on the large pulmonary department where a lot of patients with end-stage cancer are, and euthanasia is being practiced. It's done by the pulmonary physicians. Surgical patients rarely require euthanasia, but it's happening there. And the main thing, the wish of the patient is leading. And I've heard that you say, even if the patient's will is not a right, but in Holland it is. And people do not care about legislation, about what is in the law, about declarations. This is what I want. And there you have the culture for 20, 30 years about self-regulation, self-awareness, and all that. What I want, that should happen. And yes, a lot of them are motivated by the suffering they have seen in the past. And yes, we talk about good palliative care, but they have not seen that yet. We're really lacking behind in Holland for good palliative care. What is in their mind is the suffering they have seen. And that together, the experience from the past and the strong will of what I want to do it my way. That is, I think, what governs the practice today. There's quite an open attitude between the doctors. Not as much debate as there should be. But I think when we start a debate, and we do have once in a while, we should avoid mentioning the past. And that's coming up all the time. Within 5 minutes, you are talking about the Nazis, about the Nuremberg declarations, and they feel attacked. They feel attacked and they said, I'm not a Nazi criminal. I want the best for my patient. And as a Christian, I have to say that, well, if I did not know about God, if I did not know about him, and many people don't know about him, and years ago, we have already passed the line that more than 50% of the people say there is no God in Holland. If I would not know about God, I think I would agree in many cases. What is the use of suffering of the last week or the last 2 weeks if we did not know about God? But I think be careful in your discussion with your colleagues, because they see themselves really as sincere doctors, and I believe they are. And they really want to help the patient. And I really believe they are sincere. They're mistaken. I'm very much against it. But in the discussion, you have to treat them as sincere people. They are. Next. I'll tell you one case that I had, I think 2 years ago. A 42-year-old, very well-known television presenter in Holland, and journalist. He was a man who was always living in fights and arguments and always involved in court cases. That was his life. That was his style. And he was referred for an operation for suspected lung cancer. And he had done a search on me. So I met him in the outpatient clinic, and immediately, he had a witness with him. He put the paper on the table and says, this is my euthanasia form. That's how I want it. And I want you to sign. And I looked at him and I said, the first thing you will have the operation is not going to kill you. I don't know yet whether it's lung cancer, I think it is, but I'm not going to treat your paper, I'm going to treat you. And no, I've never killed someone intentionally. I'm not going to do euthanasia, but I won't let you choke. And he looked at me. And he stretched out his hand. He said, deal. Deal. And the paper was never mentioned. Well, operated on him, and it was, took a lot of biopsies, widespread cancer. Eventually, he died of cancer. And yes, he had euthanasia. He arranged his euthanasia with a lot of publicity in the newspaper and all that, and he even wrote a book. I'm not named there, but I'm very well described in that book, but respectfully. Respectfully. Next one. So my conclusion, only a few slides, sorry. Laws and declarations, important as they are, they're not playing a role in the mind of the people. There's something for court cases up there. There's something of the past. People in the street, as we say, vote with their feet. They know what they want. I can determine my will. What I want, I will say, and that has to be done. And we don't mind at all if it's a human right, yes or no. That is what I want. That's the mindset of the people. And I would say in debate, make sure the others recognize themselves in how you describe them. Again, avoid the terms Nazi practice and murders. They don't feel themselves as such. You do so, they're still very much open to your attitude, and they still allow you the freedom of conscience out of respect. And I think, yes, do all this, but in the everyday practice on the floor, do the next one, show the better way. Next one is my last. As again, Kevin de Jong, the world needs to see Christians burning, not with self-righteous fury at the sliding morals in our country, but with passion for God. Show the better way. And do everything here, but in daily practice, show the better way.
Thank you very much. Now we'll have 20 minutes for group discussions, and all in Zoom will have the possibility to. I think we will arrange that now. So you're divided into groups, and for 20 minutes you have the possibility. And I think Kalle have some questions that you can discuss that will be shown here, but you can also discuss whatever you like in this topic. And here you can divide into how many groups? 3 groups, perhaps? 4 groups. Yeah. So divide into 4 groups. And we'll be back in 20 minutes for a general discussion. Thank you. Twenty minutes for a general discussion. And those on Zoom can send in via the chat function. So please, if someone from each group would like to make a summary of the discussion in each group, it would be very nice. Otherwise, we can have questions to the speakers or whatever you like. So could perhaps someone from this group, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so we had a very wide talk and wide discussion ranging from the importance of speaking with the patients and to take in different views, to have this conversation with both palliative patients and with other colleagues that is pro or against euthanasia, to be able to see their standpoint and their view, and like Rick Paul said, to consider how they see themselves and how we can reach something constructive through talking about these these issues, these matters, and to have that conversation, to not be afraid to speak about it and to discuss it. And that's basically not everything, but some things that we were talking about. The importance of hearing each other's perspectives and to have the conversation.
Someone from the other group? Hulda not only sings but speaks.
We talked about the importance of being a part of medical committees that actually affect the parliament and the laws, which Finland has done a great job to be there and actually affecting the issue. And we also talked about the debate climate in Sweden, that it's very harsh and that it's hard to stand there and not be a part of the main opinion. Even though euthanasia is illegal, it's still very common to be pro and not so popular to speak against. So we need to be brave.
And from Rick's group, is it someone? No more comments? Some questions to the speakers, perhaps? No, everything is crystal clear. And do we have some Zoom from Zoom? Very good. Rune will give us a question from Zoom. We discussed how much euthanasia affect the trust of patients to doctors because they cannot be sure what you're trying to heal them or doing the opposite, especially with elderly patients. This might affect some people's willingness to search help for symptoms and might cause delays for treatment. Also, the burden for some doctors who really have done this might be too heavy. Very good. And thank you for good presentations, Kalle and Rick. And this was from Markus Partanen. Thank you, Markus, for your interesting thoughts.
I think I have to make a comment also, and it is from my perspective as a pediatric neurologist. And I feel that a whole group of disabled children will be betrayed when we pass a legislation that allows for euthanasia. And my experience meeting very disabled children is that I have never yet met where they are asking in any way that I can discern a willingness to die. They are so important in their family structure, and they are telling us so much about life, what is worth in life. And to withhold that from the family and society, that is a magnificent defeat for us.
Okay, I shared a personal testimony which covers another aspect of this, and it has to do with the what happens at the end of life, the existential questions that may come up. And I told the group here that I'm not, okay, my name is Lars Ljungström. I'm an infectious disease doctor. I don't have a Christian background. My parents aren't Christians. My grandparents not either. My grandfather, he died when I was only 3 years old in 1959. And I've learned afterwards he died from renal failure, but secondary also cardiac failure. And my grandmother said he was very swollen. He couldn't get rid of all the water in his body. So I never knew him, of course. But I can imagine that maybe when he died, he was in a situation where if euthanasia had been allowed, he could very well have been exposed to or suggested or chosen that option. Now, in I think 1988, I was out speaking about medical ethical issues in a local group of Christian Democratic politicians in my hometown. And after that presentation, a lady came up to me and she asked me if this man, if he was my grandfather. And I said, yes, he was. And she said that at that time, I worked as a nurse's aide in the hospital in Mariestad. And she said, I usually sat there by night with the patients. And when your grandfather was very sick, he asked me, we often sat down and talked, and then he asked me to read the Bible to him. So she said that she read from the Gospel of John, and they talked much about it. And she said to me that I am positively sure that when your grandfather died, he was a personal Christian. And I've heard many other stories like that. So we don't know, but much happens at the end of life when you know the end is coming and maybe have time to think. And I've heard from others also that God speaks to people in those situations. And of course, that's an aspect that we as Christians can't expect. We do not believe to really understand, but I think it should emphasize to ourselves the importance of, that this last time in life may be an important time.
So it's very good that we hear stories like that, because in the publicity and the newspapers, you usually see the stories pro euthanasia or pro suicide. I tell you also one story. I have been for a few years in the board of a hospice in Tampere. That hospice was the first one in the Nordic countries, and it's the biggest one in Finland still. There was a patient or a person who wanted to go to Switzerland for assisted suicide, but because there was a row, he had to wait for a long time before it would have been possible in Switzerland. He came to the hospice in Tampere to wait for that time, and it took a while, and he was in very good care there, and he felt that oh, this is the way I want to spend the end of my life. I don't need any more assisted suicide, because here they give me a good end of life here, and the rest of my life as good as possible here in these surroundings. I wish to die by artificial ways. It disappeared, and that's the experience that we have in our hospice at Tampere. when there's good palliative care, the wish for euthanasia, it disappears. And this patient saw before he died, he granted maybe the money which he decided to use for the visit to Switzerland to the hospice. So I would like to hear stories like this. And I challenge you to effect to the politics, to the public opinion, wherever you can do something. What is the discussion field for you? Be brave.
I'm glad to hear that, because it's one of the things that drives people towards euthanasia. If you make them to feel they are a burden, if you make them to feel they're useless, that's what drives people to wanting the end of life. And we have, in the West, we have too many things to live with, and we have not enough to live for. There's the big problem, the loneliness in our society, that older people say, well, why am I here? I'm of no use. And if, as Christians and as churches, if we can do something about that, we're taking a big step.
Okay, I think everybody who wanted to say something have had that possibility. And I would like to thank you all, Kalle and Rick, for contributing, and for everybody who's been taking part in this session. Now it will be time for lunch, and I think there is no lunch up at Kungsgatan now. So everybody has to go to a nice restaurant and have lunch, and then we'll gather at 6 o'clock in the evening. And Magnus have some details.
And 2 o'clock, the guys who want to go to Lilla Bommen and have that ferry boat trip and maybe a cup of coffee on the other shore. 2 o'clock outside Kungsgatan 45.